Predicting the 2025 ladder seems to be a nightmare. Every team that ended horribly in 2024 seems to have a lot of potential to rise up the ranks in 2025. Everyone's hyped on the Tigers at the moment, it seems. Gus even said they could make the top 8. The Rabbits still have a phenomenal roster and the returning greatest coach of all time. The Eels have made big moves in the offseason, have a new coach of their own, and on paper have the best halves combination in the competition, now that Jerome and Nathan have been broken up. The Titans, now with Reg in tow, might have the best forward pack in the competition, and they have 3 world-class fullbacks, for better and for worse. Everyone is waiting for the Warriors to strike again, plus they've landed their perhaps biggest signing of all time with James Fisher-Harris. The Dragons were so close last year, have looked excellent in the trials, and I believe in Shane Flanagan. The Raiders were overachievers last year and boast perhaps the most promising young roster in the league. And Ricky knows how to get them just one more win in 2025, I reckon. The Dolphins might be the exception to the rule, and most people probably have them sliding downwards, maybe even all the way into last position, hint hint, but I'm not ready to count them out just yet. They can't all make it though, such is life. There's only 8 final spots after all, but there's no doubt that some of them will. Have any of the top 8 teams been severely weakened to the point of them being obvious falling out of the top 8 contenders? Melbourne certainly isn't going anywhere. Their roster has only improved this season with the addition of Uka Tamanu. And Cameron Munster, who is the best player in the world on his day, seems to be in better shape than he was last season. Penrith also are going nowhere. 5 in a row sounds like the most likely outcome in 2025 to me. This is, however, likely the hardest they've ever been hit by off-season transfers. Their star front rower and one half of the greatest halves pairing of the modern era, both gone. And still I'd be shocked if there's a grand final this year that doesn't at least feature them. Then we come to the Roosters. This is our first serious contender, I think, for a potential fall-off. The Roosters have lost a lot of players and a lot of experience coming into 2025. Michael Jennings has retired, Luke Keary has moved on, Joseph Manu has gone to rugby union, though apparently he could be back partway through the season. They let Terrell May go, Joseph Sawali has gone to rugby union, Satili Tupanua has gone to the Bulldogs, and Jared has gone to the Super League. Their only signing of note is Chad Townsend, who's a 33-year-old backup halve they bought who will probably have to play most of the season starting because, also Sam Walker did his ACL and won't be back until most of the season is over. Same thing for their starting hooker Brandon Smith. And while that all sounds like a lot and everybody's grinning right now because everybody hates the Roosters and their seemingly endless success, having only missed 4 final series in the last 25 years. But just remember, we haven't been that well behaved. God is not good enough for us to be counting out the Roosters just yet. They might somehow make the fucking top 4, even with their depleted roster. They'll limp there if they have to. Their roster still somehow isn't bad, and if they have to make a late season run with Smith, Walker, and Manu all back to make it happen, they just might. Then we have Cronulla, who kind of tripped and fell at the back end of 2024, but then got a bit of bluster back in the finals, particularly on the back of Braden Trindle. The addition of Adam Fanua-Blake also could be massive. I think Cronulla are potential dark horses to win the minor premiership in 2025 and properly play a prelim. I don't think they're going anywhere in 2025. The Cowboys are a more interesting proposition. I can never really get a read at where they're at in the Todd Payton era. They overachieved massively in 2022, only to underachieve massively in 2023 with expectations on, while also beating full-strength Penrith teams during the year. Then in 2024, they seemingly under the radar snuck into the top 5 and found their way into the second week of the finals where they lost to the aforementioned Sharks. In the offseason, they let go of Chad Townsend, who didn't even play in those finals matches. They've also lost their iconic old man winger. They've lost Val Holmes. But Tom Dearden seems to be in the form of his career and spiraling upwards in both the club and Origin arenas. And though their predicted lineup doesn't look too strong on paper, the Cowboys have never really been renowned for their star-studded rosters when they've had success. All that is to say, I could easily see a reality where they finish 5th again, or 12th, and both seem entirely plausible and like they were always going to be. They do have this current trajectory of 1 year in and 1 year out of finals. Really, I have no firm idea. The Bulldogs are a team I think most people are expecting to climb in 2025, let alone falter back out of the top 8. After an historic 2024 that didn't end exactly how they wanted it to, the optimism is still very much alive around the Bulldogs. Their roster is another one that doesn't seem as strong on paper as it does in practice. Their star player is a center, there's still question marks on the long-term viability of Toby Sexton, and they still seem a little small in the forwards. But they were on fire in the back half of 2024, beating team after team with supposed better rosters than them. They won't be missing finals football, I don't think, though I'm not so in love with them pushing into the top 4 like others seem to be. I think the expectation might get to them a little bit. Manly is an interesting case. In the ways everybody sort of believes in the Bulldogs, I think nobody believes in Anthony Seibold. So it's hard to predict their success. Manly haven't made back-to-back final series in over a decade. And even though all signs look good now, with Turbo showing great signs in his international appearances at the end of last year, and guys like Lehigh Hopewade coming into their own, along with the most experienced halfback in the league leading them around the park, I can just easily see them slipping and finishing 10th or 11th again. Just because it's their pattern. They'll beat a bunch of the top 8 teams, I'm sure. They'll beat Melbourne once, but underperform against Canberra or something, and land 10th. I can just see it. Manly is another dark horse for the 4 for a lot of people, and is the team with perhaps the best roster in the entire league. But to me, they're certainly a possibility to fall out of the top 8. This brings us to Newcastle, who I underestimated last year, thinking the Dolphins were surely going to push through them in the last round and make finals. But alas, they did not. And I was sitting here prepping today to underestimate them going into this season too. I was going to say that they were almost a guarantee for me to fall out of the top 8 in 2025. And I was ready to make the kind of crazy prediction that they might come last, and that Adam O'Brien might get the sack, which I see as a bit of an inevitability. But then the trials happened, specifically the second one against the Roosters, and they looked brilliant. Now I know getting tricked by trials is the biggest amateur move in the business, but it's got me second guessing myself a little bit. So my instincts are telling me the Knights are ready for a steady fall off. But reality seems to be indicating the opposite. So I'm at a bit of a crossroads with our medieval friends. Now, I'm sure a lot of you disagree with certain segments of my analysis there, but I think that just reinforces the original point. It feels like Storm, Panther, and Shark are locks to finish somewhere in the top 8, while every other team could believably finish in the top 8. Some are more unlikely than others, but none are impossible, I don't think, which I think has led to maybe the most exciting season going in a long time. But if I had to place everybody on a dreaded predictive ladder, how would it shake out? Well, first I want to talk about ladder movement over the last decade. Looking at these ladders and numbers, there's usually a change of about 3 teams each season into and out of the top 8. That number should keep us a little more honest in predicting top 8 placement. We don't want 6 teams dropping out of the top 8, so our underdog favourites we all believe in can all slip in. My lovely Gold Coast Titans will not be featuring in my top 8, even if I really do believe in them. That being said, I've done 2 ladders actually. One I've made off instinct and narrative, a ladder that I think facilitates the narrative I foresee in season 2025, and another I ran through the ladder predictor on the NRL website, actually teasing out who I think will win each game, and we've arrived at 2 relatively different ladders. First of all, obviously on my narrative one, I've got the Knights in last because I'm predicting an Adam O'Brien sacking this season, and he'd have to be at the bottom of the table to facilitate that. Outside of that, and maybe Dez, I think most of the coaches are safe this year. Well, that is as long as Benji improves the Tigers, who I've got in 8th place on both ladders. I think they'll be big improvers this year, and I think maybe the defining story of the season will be them finally playing finals footy again. The other big discrepancy between the ladders is the placement of the Parramatta Eels. I think their exceptional halves pairing will see them to a lot of success this year, but outside of my own narratives, it's probable that they don't finish quite so high, especially if the dramas around Dylan Brown's contract keep flaring up. I could see that derailing their whole season. Also notably in my narrative ladder, I've got Manly missing the 8, whereas in the predictor one, I did have them in the top 8. I just foolishly believe in their pattern. I also believe in Shane Flanagan, perhaps more than I should. All I'll say is we should all watch out for these Dragons and these Raiders. I can see them both overachieving this year, despite me having both of them out of the top 8 in both ladders. Recent injury news has deflated South Sydney a little bit for a lot of people, but I still see Wayne getting them all the way up the ladder. Notably also in both ladders, I actually do believe we behaved good enough over the off-season for the Roosters to miss the finals this year. Yippee. Also, I've got a Cowboys fall-off in both of my ladders. The last noteworthy placement, I guess, is the Broncos, who I believe will be all the way up there in the top 4 and premiership contenders once again in 2025. I don't even know if that's still a hot take at this point. That's ultimately my season and ladder predictions for the NRL season in 2025. I have a Panthers 5-peat on the brain, I think, for premiers. And probably Melbourne again for minor premiers. Knights or Dolphin for the spoon, apparently. Also, Queensland absolutely will be winning State of Origin. I'll leave you with that. Hopefully I get this out before the Vegas games. Let the season begin. Hopefully I'll have videos to accompany it all year long.